You said like you wanted to dive into Japan. I thought we were like planning a trip to Tokyo and I gotta like go
Oh.
skiing and see some gardens or something. And then you talked about like boring
World War II.
companies owning shares in other companies and some history lesson.
This podcast contains the arguably witty banter of two friends, Skippy and Doogles, that like to debate about investing. The content is intended to be entertaining and for informational purposes only, not investment advice. You should do your own research and consult a financial professional before using any of the information in this podcast, and especially before investing.
What's up, man?
Whoa, you're not allowed to travel to new locations.
I got jelly beans. Speaking of jelly beans, you ready for this?
Yeah.
So to give you a little quiz, I'm in the state, and I didn't fact check this, but I'm in the state, the only state that has had two governors that were actors.
I mean, that's got to be California, right?
Yeah, it wasn't really that hard of a quiz, but
that's kind of weak.
But let me tie it back to the jelly beans. Which of these governors loved him some jelly beans?
Let's go Reagan.
Yeah, all right. I failed.
That's the best you got, man. Wow.
I'm sorry. How you doing?
Good. How about you?
This is like a pure fishbowl day, I think, today. Just a medley.
Oh, and we're bringing in a new game that's sweeping the nation. Get ready.
Speaking of new game, but not at all, is I'm going to have a non-quiz quiz for you to kick off what I think will probably be the first topic.
Okay.
What's your favorite color?
Orange.
Nope. Teal.
Oh, Peter. Yeah.
Peter.
My favorite color is actually Peter. Yeah.
My favorite color is Peter Thiel. So what did we learn this week?
All right. Well, so this is an article. You ever read these articles and you're like, I have to have someone else read this to make sure that I'm actually comprehending this right? So I'm so excited to talk to you because I want to make sure that my understanding here is right. So typically anything related to tax stuff, we talked about ProPublica last week and Buffett's tax return and everyone else. And I go, who cares? Like, these are smart people. The tax code is what it is. If they're not breaking the law, deal with it. Make the tax code better, right? This article this week actually gave me some pause on that stance. What did you think? What did you think of Peter Thiel's IRA, Doogles?
I can't remember when this was, but it was a few weeks ago. We talked about, like, just very, very briefly mentioned Mitt Romney's IRA and how he'd been able to make a bunch of money on it, but just kind of brushed past it. But then this article like goes into more detail about Peter Thiel's. Before we go into some of the detail, let me just drop this tiny little phrase quote as to why the Roth IRA was started by Senator Roth, back 25 years ago. It was started for hardworking middle-class Americans to be able to save in their retirement. When I think hardworking middle class, I think Peter Thiel.
Well, hey, at one point he was probably middle class. I mean, pre-PayPal.
Maybe.
Who knows?
I actually don't even know that.
Yeah, I don't know what sort of means he came from. So, history lesson, and Doogles, I know you'll help me with this, but Peter Thiel founded PayPal. He wrote 0 to 1, pretty solid book, right? After PayPal and the money that comes with PayPal, you would know this much better than me. He's been a dominant figure in Silicon Valley, and he has a bunch of other investments. He's crazy, crazy wealthy, right? Is that a fair way for the listeners who don't know about him? Is that a decent background?
Yeah, I'll drop a couple more in there. Just he's an early investor in some of like hot Silicon Valley startups, like Facebook is a big one, and co-founder investor in Palantir.
Yep, so he has an IRA. Roth IRA. A Roth IRA basically is post-tax money. So when you take the money out of a Roth IRA, you will not pay a tax penalty on it, right? His Roth IRA appears to be worth $5 billion. When I read that, I was like, wow, there's a $6,000 cap effectively on putting money into a Roth IRA. Like, how do you even get to $5 billion? What he did, and maybe this is him, maybe he has brilliant tax advisors, maybe there's other things going on that aren't crystal clear in the article. I think he ended up putting $1,700 in the IRA. And then he purchased shares for like pennies of a company that very few people had access to purchase. It's basically like pre-public. And here's where I want you to correct me if my misunderstanding is wrong. Is that how you understood the article?
That's what I read, which was surprising. I thought he would have done this in a different way, but that's what
Yeah.
I understood.
So just for the listeners to try and hammer home the point, he buys something that's true value might be $100 a share in the very near future, but he's able to buy it for pennies per share, because it's basically like not a, and I don't understand the logistics of this, but it's not really a fully public equity yet, but somehow he's able to use IRA money to purchase it.
This categorically, I think, is a similar thing to what our good friend Mitt Romney did. Is that there's some IRA either accounts or custodians that allow you to buy into non-traditional assets. So like most IRAs, your standard, I don't know, Charles Schwab, wherever, Fidelity, wherever you're getting your IRA, you buy stocks, you buy whatever is available there.
Yes.
But then some IRAs you can just buy other things. I don't know how they make that happen. And so I think this is a case where he's buying options effectively in a startup or early shares, right? In a startup, RSU, something like that.
Yeah, right. So and I don't want to bore people with the logistics of it all, because the key point is he has access to some sort of investment that the large majority, like more than 99.9% of people, would not be able to buy for that price at that time. He knows that it's very likely that that investment is significantly mispriced at that time, partly because it's not like publicly tradable. And so he might invest $1,700 in something that in the very near term might be worth $50 million, right? And because he does that up front with this interesting accounting strategy, I'll call it, he turns that $1,700 into $50 million really quickly. And then he might sell that equity, but then he has $50 million tax-free that he can invest in the next thing. And then all of a sudden he has $5 billion. And when he decides to draw on that $5 million, now he has to be more than 59 and a half years old, and he has to meet all the qualifications, but he's going to pay zero taxes on that. So if he would have done it in a more traditional way, he might still have $5 billion, but he would be expected to pay taxes on that $5 billion when he sells those equities. It's very interesting. I'm not necessarily a hater of this. I just had never really known that it was done at this scale.
It's huge, because I think Mitt Romney's is, I mean, it's a couple $100 million or something like that. I mean, it's still big.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's kind of crazy. The other loophole, I'll just kind of call it, and I think it actually is a loophole that I'll throw in here, is that the article mentions is the ability to convert a traditional IRA into a Roth IRA, but you pay one-time taxes on that at that time, and then you can let it, whatever it is, grow tax-free from then on. And so it's a there's got to be some kind of a, well, maybe not gotta. The more progressive side of me says a cap would be interesting, like on something like this, because to what we've talked about before when we discuss like inequity and inequality, just taxes can be used for, in a mixed economy like we have, I think, for good. Now, some people might say, I don't like big government. I don't want the government involved, this kind of stuff. And I think that's a fair argument, but it seems strange that once you start to get to 5 billion, that you need to try and play this game. I think that's kind of my point. It's different than, as you were mentioning last week when we were talking about Buffett, et cetera. I think it's different if you say, look, this is the tax law, and I'm just doing my normal everyday thing. And if the tax law doesn't make me pay, I'm not going to pay. Then if you say, let me figure out how I can transfer money between different accounts or buy it in this account that's tax shielded to make billions and not. Yeah. But that is Thiel's thing. I mean, from a political standpoint, like Thiel is like, if I can never pay a dime in tax, I'm not going to pay a dime in tax. Like that's his thing.
Yeah,
and so if the game allows it.
There's different levels of loophole. This is a pretty complex scheme to avoid paying taxes on a large sum of money. It almost feels manufactured in a way that you shouldn't be able to turn $1,700 into millions of dollars in a very short period of time unless there's clear mispricings that you and kind of only you are aware of. It feels a little slimy that way. I don't want to tax. I mean, and I don't know, if one person or 100 people find a loophole, does it mean it needs to be fixed? I don't know that I think there needs to be reform tomorrow. I just found this fascinating. I didn't even realize this was possible. And so part of me wants to just stand up and clap and applaud the genius that he just dodged. Say he paid 20% tax on $5 billion. He just saved himself $1 billion. And I think theoretically he did it in a way that's legal.
Yeah, I don't know. We don't have to get into the politics side of this. It just seems like one of those things where you're just like, cap it, because it wasn't meant for this. Like, the spirit of what it's for, like, no one's gonna get $5 billion, which is why we'd never think about capping it, because it wasn't meant to get to that point. But what's the max benefit in someone's lifetime in an IRA? Like,
yeah, I mean, so they said, hey, max you can put it as $6,000 a year. Like, they said, based on the world's best investing track record ever, like, no one gets to more than, I don't know what it is, let's just say $1 million bucks, and he's at $5 billion. So I guess I get your point there. Like, it's not, if this is a retirement vehicle for the middle class, and you said, oh, you start to pay taxes on more than $1 billion, the only person in the world that impacts is Peter Thiel.
Yeah, exactly. It's just it's just made for you. Like, just to be clear.
Which would kind of be hilarious. I'm sure that would really fire him up. And then, I wonder what his current net worth is, but it's billions and billions, right?
Yeah. I mean, he was the initial big check into Facebook with $500,000. So I don't know what he sold.
He's doing all right.
He's doing pretty well there. And we could look it up probably. But all right. Fishbowl topic. You want to dive in?
I do. No, actually, I want to go straight, just because I'm so excited about it, to the game that's sweeping the nation. It is called Rational, Irrational. And it means you have to make a determination of these 5 things I'm going to throw your way as to if this is rational or irrational. Pretty simple, right, Doogles?
I think so, but you're probably going to throw some curveballs.
All right. Rapid fire, here we go. First, crypto this week, down as much as 25%. Rational or irrational?
Rational.
That infrastructure bill.
Is any political dealings?
Answer.
Rational.
A 48-inch vertical leap at the NBA Combine.
Good God. Irrational.
People, this is in economics terms, people's behavior in non-bubble times.
Irrational.
Oh my goodness. What about people's behavior in bubble times?
Irrational. I think people's behavior is irrational.
All right, let's dive in. So first, the most fun is a 48-inch vertical leap. Some dude named Keon Johnson from the University of Tennessee set a NBA combine record, which is basically the world's greatest athletes made for jumping. 48-inch vertical leap. I mean, you talked about people like Vince Carter, Michael Jordan, like all these incredible, Dominique Wilkins. I mean, you're typically talking like low 30s. Sometimes it might be 36. Sometimes if you're a real freak athlete, you might be pushing 48 or
crazy.
40. I've never heard of anything near 48. This is insane.
No, if you gave me a 48-inch ladder and said climb it, there isn't 100% chance that I make it to the top.
There's like a 92% chance.
It's 92%. 92%. So jumping to the top, that's insane. It makes me think it's like almost as freakish as you watch that 30 for 30 with Bo Jackson when he jumps out of the pool.
No, I need to check that one out.
Oh, you got to check that out. He like leaps out of a pool, so water, right? Because that's how pools work. Onto the side. It's insane. They're just some athletes, but that's why he broke himself. Bo Jackson.
Well, but like, so even your point, like jumping over, I was doing box jumps yesterday. It might have been like a 30-inch box. Like, to get your feet up that high does not mean you necessarily have that vertical. You can do a lot of that with just you contracting your legs, right?
Exactly.
So people might be able to jump over a ladder, but I'm talking like his arm fully extended went 48 inches higher than it was on the ground. It's outrageous.
It shouldn't
All
be
right.
allowed.
The reason I ask about crypto is because the thing that I just chuckled all week. I really enjoyed the crypto crash. I know we're not going to spend time on it, but when things fall off a cliff and like it goes down 10% in a day, I always ask people like, so is this a fair price or was yesterday's price a fair price? And you know what 90% of those people say? They say I have no idea because it's not an asset that generates cash flows, and I just like to chuckle about that.
With crypto specifically, or are you just trying to
With
get
crypto specifically?
Okay.
Like if United Airlines got cut in half and I said, Doogles, is this like a fair price now? You could at least be able to do some analysis, some fundamental analysis that says, well, based on the profits they've generated over the past 10 years, I think we're in the ballpark of fair, or I think it's overpriced. With most cryptos, it's just like, I don't know. It was 40K last week, so now it's 30K. What does that mean?
Do you think it's fair? Okay, when you take and you separated out a bit, like some cryptocurrencies, like Dogecoin, which is started as a meme, as a joke, to pay Jamaican bobsledders or whatever, and now has become whatever it is now. But then you separate out those from the Ether or Bitcoin, side of things potentially. Not that necessarily you can value either, but there probably is a separation.
Yeah.
If you make that separation, do you think it's rational or irrational what I'm about to say? Do you think if we look at Bitcoin to say the value is based on probabilities of it becoming a mainstream currency, and like if it does that, then it's probably worth what X, and if it doesn't do that, then it's probably worth 0, and like effectively it's just whatever the probability between those two things is. And so when you have someone like China that cracks down, then you go, oof, well, I don't know.
Yeah, I know. I think that's actually a rational thought. I just think that's a really tough problem to solve. But I am loving people that attempt to solve it. Or for Ether, because Ether is like the main system that allows you to buy NFTs or do a lot of like the crypto transaction and the crypto businesses that are built on top of things are built on top of Ether. Theoretically, you can build some models that say this is how that impacts the supply and demand equation there, and therefore you can estimate a price. What I was kind of joking about is 95% or more of those so-called investors aren't doing that analysis.
Oh yeah.
And so you
or any analysis.
Is the fair price of Bitcoin 10K? $10 or 60K? And they go, well, I don't know, it's 60K like 2 months ago, so I like that seems good.
And that point is what I love generally about the phrase buy the dip, whether it's about crypto or otherwise, no matter what the dip is.
No, that if you follow the crypto social media, diamond hands, hold, whatever, it's like there's no like, guys, this is the true value of this asset is this because of XYZ. So it just dropped below that, so you got to buy it. It's just like, no, I bought some at a price that's higher than today. So it's in my best interest to yell from the rooftops, buy some, because otherwise I'm losing money. Like that's what's happening here.
Yeah. A couple of days ago, I don't think this analysis would be possible, at least not with any capabilities I have. But a couple of days ago, I was reading some headline about Jim Cramer yelling, probably literally yelling about, buy the dip on whatever, these five stocks. And I was just really curious if there was some way that you could look at any time that a pundit says buy and then look at the performance over the next year. Like I'd just be curious as to what that breakdown would be.
Is this a random for me? You want me to show off my 48-inch vertical? They've done this frequently with Jim Cramer. Jim Cramer's stock picks underperform. It's well documented. If you follow,
I got to read up on this.
Mad Money? Yeah, I'll sing you an article or two. Man, and I'm not hating on Jim Cramer. Like, he's a smart guy. It's just what happens when you have to talk that much, and what might be happening to us, Doogles, when we have to talk as much as we do on the pod, is you unfortunately say some stupid stuff. And he has to fill content every week. And yeah, it's well documented that his stock picks they underperform.
What percent of the S&P 500 has he suggested you buy.
Pretty much like 112%. I mean, it's just which CEO is willing to come on his show that night, because that's how he's going to spin it. I mean, people know that's a sham, right? I don't know. I don't like talking trash about people. He's a good guy and he's a smart guy. Just don't necessarily follow his picks or buy everything he tells you to buy.
I gotta look into to some of that research though. It's interesting. It's not surprising.
But I want to reset. I know we're going to talk about the infrastructure bill in a little bit, but I want to talk about people in non-bubble times and people in bubble times. Okay. So I'm reading a new book called How Markets Fail. It's called The Logic of Economic Calamities. It's by John Cassidy.
Yeah,
and I actually don't know much about
I love that book.
You read it? Okay. Mm-hmm. So the thing that struck me in the intro is he talks about Adam Smith and the invisible hand, a lot of like economics from the Chicago School, and Doogles. If you want to give a basic history lesson, feel free. But the way I'd say it, the thought of the invisible hand is there's a natural balance of supply and demand in rational times that typically sets prices in a way that makes sense. It makes sense for the consumer. It makes sense for the company providing that good. And generally, free market economists say all is well. Things are good. What John Cassidy talks about is he might back that philosophy in a typical rational time, I'd call it, like I don't know, 2015. I'm just throwing out a year. What he says is
just like a time where nothing's going on.
Yeah, like, that's kind of a natural balance of things. But he makes this clear distinction for rational irrationality that happens in bubble times. And it's just an interesting concept. So he says in bubble times, and let's talk about Dogecoin as a bubble. I don't think that offends anyone. And I'm not really, I don't care about Dogecoin. I'm just talking about bubbles. We can talk about tulips or anything else. He says the rational behavior that's built into the human psyche continues to act rational in a bubble time in a way that turns the larger behavior into irrationality for like all consumers. And so what he means by that is if I am watching Dogecoin go from a penny to like 66 cents in, I think it was something like 4 months, it's not irrational of me to be like, have you seen how many people are getting rich off this thing? Like, I want to get rich. Think of the impact that could have on my life. So me individually, I might put my life savings into that thing. Now, this is an example. I obviously didn't do that, and I obviously wouldn't do that, but some people have. And he argues that they are actually acting rational at that point in time from their personal perspective, being caught up in that bubble, because they're going, everyone else is getting rich. I want to get rich too. It'd be dumb not for me to get rich. But what that does when enough people fall into that trap is you get a general irrationality happening. And that's basically what creates a bubble. I don't know that I believe this or agree with it, but it really made me think. What do you think?
Yeah, I think the thought, I haven't read that book in a little while. So I don't remember the exact detail of what he laid out, but I think if you take the approach that generally people would operate in their best interest, and the definition of rationality is doing what's in my apparent best interest.
Yeah.
And then say, but if everyone operates in their best interest, then that's not in the best interest of the whole, or something like that. Maybe I can get there. I always think people are irrational for the most part. That's my take. I think that most of the time people are not thinking in a holistic manner, which is my definition of rational. I think that it's a short-term view, not thinking with consequences. I don't know. I don't want to be negative on society. I just like generally think that that's how people are.
No, so I love this because I think maybe all that's happening here is it's a nuanced definition of what is rational. And what he had me thinking about is when he talks about rational irrationality, you could be rational for that 5-minute stretch or that like 2-hour stretch or that like decade or lifetime long stretch. And I think society defines rationality as like rationality over a longer period of time. And I think that's probably the right definition. But I never thought about a rational decision with a time frame assigned to it.
Yeah,
And
it's
if you
interesting.
do that, what's rational, the definition of what's rational changes.
Yeah, that's pretty fascinating. I want to go back and read that book. I remember just really liking that book a lot.
Yeah, I think it's solid. While we're doing book review stuff, I read 2 other books this week that I would recommend. One is called Just Mercy, referring to like true, like justice in terms of mercy, about an appellate attorney based in Alabama. I think his name is Brian Samuelson. Crushing, really tough read about racial inequities in the South with our prison system and the death penalty and everything else. But I would encourage people to check it out if it's at all of interest to you. I think it's really good background knowledge. So I wanted to mention that. And then I read a book called Exercised by a Harvard professor that I would also recommend if you're into that sort of thing. Just breaks down
Is
kind
that
of
like The Exorcist? Or
no, it's about the myths relating to exercise in Western civilization and what's actually true and what's not. And so he studies a lot of what's the right terms? Basically, tribes where technology and almost farming haven't taken over the lifestyle yet, and compares their lifestyle to the modern Western culture and breaks down some myths about when exercise is good and when it's bad and how much you should actually need. So side topics
dropping
there,
knowledge.
but decent books if you're into that sort of thing.
Dropping knowledge. Love it.
Should we talk infrastructure?
Sure thing. Dive into the fishbowl for that. Actually, can I dive in for maybe I'll say this is just the what's going on in the House of Representatives type of fishbowl situation and throw 2 things in there. With one is infrastructure. So we discussed before Biden's potential infrastructure bill, the proposal that he had. And it seems like there's the latest progress here is that he and 10 other people, this makes me think about Hamilton, right? They stepped into a room and which something almost happened, but there's like a handshake-ish agreement, at least to start off some conversations. And what they've agreed upon so far is just around physical infrastructure. And so this is talking about bridges, roads, right?
Yeah.
Electric grid, that kind of stuff. And Biden stated, if this is all that comes out, my pen is staying on the ground. That's basically what he said. He said it in very forceful Delawarean terms, but that's basically what he said. What the amounts here are lower than what he stated before, but it's about $1 trillion. So $973 billion if it goes over 5 years, but there's an option for it to continue over 8, which would be 1.2. So about $1 trillion. So he's got 3 trillion more he needs to figure out to spend. But that's it. What this did, though, from an investment standpoint this week, is the things that were cranking down in the market, that were taking a little bit of a dive. One of them was commodities, and this week it rebounded. Basically, like came back up because of it. Commodities, stocks like Caterpillar, like building things. So irrational, rational. You decide. But that's basically that's what happened. How it impacted the markets this week.
I mean, who cares about the short term? Who cares about what commodities did this week?
Irrational.
But, and who cares about politics? But there's so many fascinating like psychological elements to what's happening here. So one is, I got really excited. We got a bipartisan group together. They appeared to agree on something. I didn't even think that was possible anymore. And I love people from different like backgrounds and methodologies working together. So I was like over the moon. I was like, bipartisanship might actually not be dead. I was so excited.
Speaking of bipartisanness, there are folks that are trying to figure out what to do with big tech. And I think this is interesting from an investment standpoint. I take this as interesting because the S&P 500 is fairly concentrated, and it's concentrated by big tech. I don't remember the numbers right now, but something like these top 5 or so firms are about 25% of the index, roughly 20-25%. It's pretty, like, it's fairly concentrated. These big firms, examples are Amazon, Google / Alphabet, right? That's what we're talking about, Facebook. And so what happened this week is that there were 6 bills that were put forth by the House Judiciary Committee. They voted on them and they passed. This isn't the House overall, but it's just a group of like 50-ish people. And so there were 6 bills, and they covered a range of topics. So things like saying that big tech companies can't favor their own products, right? They can't cross-sell their own products. It raised money for the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, in order to be able to go after big tech. There are things like that. The other thing is that I thought was interesting was there was one that said the largest platforms, so these big tech companies, they have to make it easier for their users to transport their data to other platforms and maybe even communicate with other users. I mean, so there are things that are just going to the heart of what these companies do. Apple's claiming that if these measures end up fully going through and passing, that their app store basically wouldn't be able to function, and this is a security threat. So it's going to be interesting, and it reminds me of going back to 2000, right? It's just some of the nature of the things that are happening, and I might be getting a little too stretchy in my analogies, but in 2000 they were going after Microsoft, right, for antitrust, and that was one of the factors that is thrown in as to why the bubble burst. No one ever really points to one thing. It just gets to a point of fragility is my statement, and then things start to go down. But I think it's interesting.
Okay, so I don't know that I'd heard that tied to like the bubble bursting in 2000 as specifically going after Microsoft. If you go back to just like we were talking free market economics earlier, one of the core principles to the invisible hand actually working is not having monopolies. And I do think that some of these companies, whether you talk about Facebook in American social media, Apple with dominance over the phone market, Microsoft is less dominant in operating systems than they used to be. Right now, it's only about 75% of all the operating systems.
Still pretty dominant, but
it used to be 90 plus. Mm-hmm. I think that's worth exploring. I don't know that I like or support all the measures you just mentioned. I did find it interesting. Microsoft's new operating system is coming out, and they have integrated their app store with the Android app store. So basically any Android app can run on Microsoft. And that almost seems like it's headed the direction you're talking about here. How there's more ability to collaborate between platforms. Now, Apple wants no part of that because they're a closed system, and they want to be a closed system, and they always have wanted to be a closed system because that controls the user experience in a way that they think makes it better. I think Apple would be more impacted by these rules than Microsoft or Google would be.
It's going to be really interesting to follow because of the level of concentration in the market of these companies. And going back to the point around fragility, it's like another factor I think that comes into play.
Can we take a sidebar specifically related to fragility? Because what do you think, if you were simply trying to avoid an anti-fragile event for the U.S. economy, what do you think is the best way to handle these large companies? Because I think I could see an argument for both sides in terms of reducing their power and influence or not touching them at all.
Yeah. So one, to state why I think this is another point of fragility, maybe that's important first, is that we've talked about high valuations, right? Inflated valuations right now. And what that means for these companies, many companies, but I'll focus on these companies. There's a big bet, for example, for Apple, and it's $2 whatever trillion valuation. The bet is that Apple will be able to continue its dominance far into the future, right? That's why PE ratios are high for these companies, because you're betting on the future. It's all betting on the future. And so the fragility comes from the fact that if that future is based off of them taking whatever their 30% rev share from this closed market app store and them having dominance there, and you threaten that, then that's where the fragility statement comes from. So just to make that clear, is that you're taking the future away. And so the valuation gets sliced, and that's a large part of the market. So that's the point of fragility. If I was just thinking about how do you optimize for anti-fragility or stability right now, I think you have to secure the future for them. I mean, I think that's the way. Now, you might, if you wanted to balance that with how do we also protect competition, you'd probably have, I'm just going off the top of my head, but you'd probably have to think about how do you bolster competition other ways versus how do you take down these companies. Maybe you say a part of your funds have to go toward accelerators for companies that support your ecosystem. I mean, I'm making this up, but I think it's supporting competition directly versus saying you can't do the thing that you're doing.
What's the good argument for not having Facebook separate from Instagram and WhatsApp? Like, how do the users benefit at this point in the game from having those systems packaged together so they effectively don't compete against each other?
I don't use like Facebook or Instagram, so I don't know like specifically, but where the benefits would have to come from if there's some kind of like cross-functional synergy that exists. Like if there's benefit from you posting on Instagram and that photo can also pop up on Facebook, or you easy if share. I don't know. Like I'm not. I don't know about social media specifically. I'm not sure. It's more from like I could probably talk more to like the Amazon side of things where they benefit, or the benefits from Apple of like that. That makes more sense to me. I don't know.
And there's a reason I mentioned those specifically, because I see economies of scale that comes with Amazon and what Apple's done with their ecosystem, which I think has some positive network effects. And even Microsoft. Like, Microsoft's an interesting one because Microsoft just became valued more than $2 trillion.
Yeah,
which
crazy.
is a major milestone. If you look at like Apple, which did that before them, still Apple's revenue numbers, they're less dependent on basically profit from selling the iPhone, but that's still what, 70-ish%. It used to be like 80 or 90%.
Yeah.
It's still the large majority of their revenue. Microsoft has like a 5-legged stool in terms of their revenue figures.
That's a secure company.
Well, yeah, but when you talk about potentially breaking up some of these tech giants, like, that would be an interesting one, because Apple, you can't, I don't think, tell them not to sell the iPhone anymore, right? So even if you tried to break up Apple, you still have one conglomerate that manufactures the iPhone that's going to be worth like more than $1.5 trillion. You could theoretically take the other stuff elsewhere, but again, that's core to their operating system. Like, that's core to how their devices work. So I don't know how you split up Apple.
Is there this might be too much of a leap, so I might clip the other side of the pool and break my forehead. But if we go back to the beginning of this conversation, we were talking about your favorite color, teal.
Yeah.
Is there an analogy here where we're saying like about capping? You know, because I was mentioning like, yeah, maybe someone can do this and you could take advantage of this, but cap it at some point. Am I wrong to make a statement there and not to make a statement on the side of the businesses where you say, actually, it's highly beneficial for you to create these network effects, but then you have to cap it. You have to cap the gain somewhere, or is it different because they're investors that benefit also, or consumers that benefit from it?
So in this hypothetical situation, let's just throw out a number. You're saying if your business is worth more than $2 trillion, we're going to break you up in some way. That would be like a pseudo government policy.
That sounds so ridiculous.
Well, I know, but the problem I have with caps is hopefully a well-documented problem at this point. The true value of your company in the stock market is often disconnected from the true value of your company. So
yeah,
in that hypothetical conversation, the folks at Microsoft could go, yeah, we're just in a bubble right now. Like, we're actually, the fair value of our company is $1.3 trillion. And you're going to like break me up. You're going to make our cloud services division roll off and our Office 365 division. I don't know. I don't really.
Yeah, you can't do that willy nilly. Yeah. I mean, that's a hard problem to solve. And where's the line of being too anti-competitive? This is a tough one. I think it's gonna be pretty interesting to follow. I think, to see what happens with these organizations, and there will be impact on the market.
Yeah, there will.
Can I jump in the fishbowl?
You ready?
Oh, you got something? You got a quiz?
I got something.
Okay, roll with it.
All right, so I just couldn't resist. Credit Suisse came out with their global wealth survey in June, and there's 2 things I want to ask you about. So the richest continent in the world is North America. Probably not a surprise. And the poorest continent
Can you guess
in the world.
Which country probably contributes? the most to that?
I can't. Hey, don't hate on the Canadians.
All right, that's true. All right, continue. Sorry.
The poorest continent is Africa. What is the difference in wealth between your average adult in North America versus your average adult in Africa?
I would say it's probably a 50x difference.
Very close. So according to the 66 times, all these numbers are in USD. Wealth per adult in Africa, $7,300. Wealth per adult in North America, which actually seems on the high side to me. It's probably average, which is why it's skewed, is about $480,000.
It's got to be
The one
average.
other thing I wanted to talk to you about is dollar millionaires throughout the world. So if you look at all the millionaires and convert their currency back to US dollars across the world, and you say, where do these people live? What percentage of dollar millionaires live in the United States versus the rest of the world?
How about 25%?
39% of all millionaires
Wow.
live in the US. The next highest percentage, you have a guess for which country that might be?
China?
Killed it. 9% of millionaires live in China, followed by Japan at 7%, Germany at 5%, the United Kingdom at 4%. What's tricky about these numbers, it goes down from there. A lot of Europe is represented. It's a lot based on the population of your country. And because we divide the European Union into all these small countries, I think it's deceiving. I think if you looked at Europe and the US, it'd be fairly neck and neck in terms of the number of millionaires.
I know you
between
said
those
that a
two.
few times, but they aren't, like, it's not a country. So it's
I
not
know,
like
but
it's
it's
not
fairly
one
arbitrary.
sovereign
It's like if we
entity.
call Texas and California and New York their own countries.
But they're ruled by the same overall government. And so it is like there's a difference.
All right, hater. Whatever you say. Are we back to the fishbowl?
Yeah, I'm gonna pull on that because you just said the word Japan. I'm gonna pull on that thread.
Okay.
So I've been over the past few months just dipping my toe a little bit into looking into Japan because it's so interesting. And the reason why, from an investing standpoint, the reason why Japan's interesting to me, we've talked about parts of this before, is that you had this. I'll throw some quiz in here too, but you had this huge bubble, right, that ended in 1990. And what do you quiz part from the beginning of the 80s? So let's just beginning 1980 until the bubble burst a decade later. What was the increase in the Nikkei 225 situation, roughly?
You know, I know what happened from 1990 to today. You're actually down from
That's
from top of the bubble
That's
to
not
today.
even. I can't ask you a
Because I
question
know
and be like,
that
well,
answer.
I know this other thing.
I'm gonna go 3.5 times.
6x. So
6x.
6x in a decade. Okay. So then to your point, so from the peak to now, what is it? So this is
I think
for the
I think
listeners.
we're
This is
still
from
down like
1990.
20%.
Yep, that's very close. So in the last 30 years, it's down like I think 17%, something like that. So yeah, roughly 20%, which is crazy. And it's insane. Now since 2013-ish, it's actually up about 3x. And so it started going back up, but we're down from the bubble peak. But anyway, so I've just kind of found it to be interesting because I'm like, are there opportunities in Japan? So I just I just have fun looking around. I haven't done anything in Japan, but I look
There
around.
are some opportunities in Japan.
Well, now I have my answer. The answer is yes. The very helpful answer is yes.
Thanks.
So this week, I don't know if you saw this, but are you familiar with the amount of cross-shareholding or what that is in Japan?
Give me a history lesson there.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, if you want, I wasn't going to give you a history lesson, but I'm happy to actually.
Yeah.
I was just going to define. But so cross-shareholding is when a public company owns a part of another public company. It's pretty straightforward. So companies do this all the time. They'll make investments. But in Japan, it's actually it's very significant, the amount of cross-shareholding. And so to give like a real brief history lesson, because you brought it up, just going to define it. But for the record, you got me all giddy because you asked for it. So World War II happened right in the 1940s. And before World War II, there were these institutions that owned, I think they were called zaibatsus, something like that, that owned like large conglomerates. So this is reformed in some ways. But World War II happened. Allied forces came in and said, you got to break all this stuff apart because we believe this is part of the reason why Japan, it became what it became and got so militant. So they got broken apart. After that occurred, though, slowly, basically, I think they're now called kaibutsus or something like that. But slowly, they started to reform, but in a different way. And so there were some laws that capped like the percent that could be owned by other companies. It was like 5% went to 10%, down to 5%. So it's been shifting. But slowly, companies have started accumulating shares of other companies. So at this point, a stat I saw was 11% of Japan's listed companies have a listed shareholder owning a slice of more than 30% of their company. Right? Comparable number in the US is 0.9%. So you have these companies, like basically what's happening, and I'll get to why this is important in a second, but basically what's happening is you have, like, if you take a US example, this is all made up numbers because it's not real. But if you take those companies we talked about, it'd be like if Amazon owned 30% of Apple, who owned 30% of Facebook, who owned right? And so what that's led to, and shareholders are getting all angry about it, is they're saying this is bringing down our returns because you're taking all your cash and you're investing it in other companies and not giving it back to shareholders and not investing back into your business. And it's also propping up management because you'll have like Toshiba that owns 30% of, this is probably wrong, but 30% of Mitsubishi. I'm just throwing out random figures. And like you secure management because you do your backdoor deals with your buddy that runs this company. And so you're never getting voted out or voted off the board. And they're saying like, we need more shakeup and we need to spend cash in better ways. So that's kind of what people have said is happening. And then there's so much scandal that's happening with Toshiba right now. Folks should go read about that. There was a report that came out a few weeks ago. And so Toshiba is probably going to be completely overhauled because slowly outsiders have started like buying into the company. And so now it's more than half owned. So this is starting to happen in Japan, and people are crying out that it should happen even more. And it seems like it might start to occur. They basically refer to it as Japan Inc., kind of breaking apart. But I'm fascinated with this because I've wanted to see if there are opportunities in Japan, and it seems like there might be some kind of opening for it. So that's my.
Let me just go on the record and say, I thought you said like you wanted to dive into Japan. I thought we were like planning a trip to Tokyo, and I gotta like go skiing and see some gardens or something. And then you talked about like boring
World War
companies owning shares in other companies and some history lesson. That's actually fascinating. It's really, really fascinating. What I would have never immediately thought of is like, hey, I'm the CEO of Toshiba. And my buddy over here is the CEO of Mitsubishi, and we both want to live long and conquer. So I'll just buy 30% of his company. He'll buy 30% of mine. And it will be really tough to get the shareholder power to kick us out. That's a very interesting idea. And that would stagnate development and growth. So I'll bet you that the people that have more time than me, if you do a deep dive into Japan, could really find some potential deals in terms of mispricings because of how complicated the company ownership is. Is there a good article or two we could throw on the Twitter, or have you read any good books about Japan Inc.? Because that is kind of a fascinating thing.
I haven't read any books, but yeah, I'll grab up a couple things that we can throw out there. They won't all be recent, but I'll find some stuff. Because I think this is really interesting. And so I think something's going to happen over there. That's going to be an unlock. That'll be fascinating.
All right. Anything else in the fishbowl?
The survey from Lending Tree. So this is the most American thing I think I can think of. The first couple facts that come out of this. So one of the questions, they surveyed roughly 2,000 people, and about half of those said they were investors today, and the other half said that they weren't. Of these people, there was a question that's, what's the best way to spend an extra $10,000, right? And
wait, you need to answer that question before you tell me what the survey did.
Dogecoin, bro.
So first of all, I just want to say that's a stupid question. What's the best way to spend $10,000?
Yeah,
you go to any store and buy things.
Money is to buy goods and services. So
like, do they mean invest when they say spend, or like what?
Well, that's what if you have $10,000, like what is what should be the use of funds, basically? And so the answer to this question, the number one answer to this question was pay off debt. right? 44% of people came back and said pay off debt, right? The other responses were split it between investing and pay off debt. 15% said just invest it. So what's so American about this is not that answer. What's so American is a combination of that answer, and then there's the question of, have you taken on debt to invest? And 60% of people said yes. So they basically say, if I get 10,
that's nonsensical. Like that.
If I get $10,000, what should I do? I'm going to pay off debt. What I actually did do is I took out debt to invest. And they broke this out by generationally. So 80% of people said that, of Gen Z, said they have taken on debt to invest. 60% of millennials said they have. And then, so it just gets lower and lower. Gen X is 28%.
Wait. Sorry. Yeah, I know I'm all over the place today. Isn't Gen Z like, aren't you like younger than 22 right now or something? What is Gen Z? Like,
I think Gen Z,
I mean, it looks like you're born mid 90s to early 2010s. So I guess if you're born in 95, okay, that's a little older than I thought. So still, that's pretty young to be taking on debt to invest. Would be my point.
They're not scared of it. And then so then you get baby boomers is the last category, and it was 9%. So it just gets, the older you are, the less likely you are to have taken on debt to invest. It's the 80% is the crazy number, I think, for Gen Z. That's the crazy one. The types of debt are, number one is personal loans, 38%. Then there's borrowing from friends or family. 14% said they went into credit card debt. Now, here's a kicker. How consumers invested the money they took on debt for. What percent of people that took out debt to invest did it for their retirement?
I mean, these results are nonsensical. 10%. Who knows?
37%.
Can we get some of these people on the podcast so I can yell at them?
Financial education, like everywhere. This is crazy.
Okay, let's just hit on a couple of those facts. Our listeners are way too smart to get caught up in any of this, but a typical interest rate on a credit card is like 22%. The best investors in the world are lucky to make 22% yearly returns. Taking out debt from a credit card to invest is the worst idea I could possibly think of.
I can't disagree with that.
Okay.
And it's part of the the danger that we've talked about before, when you're looking at, no, I bought Tesla and it went by 7x. Like 7x is the average annual return. And so of course I'm going to take out that couple that disappeared, that came out with that video about how you buy stocks on the way up and the way down, and then we never heard from them.
They're not around anymore.
Yeah. This is craziness. I just wanted to share some of those facts. I thought it was interesting. We're in love with, as you mentioned, as a federal government, in love with debt. Yeah. And as individuals, we're in love with debt right now. These interest rates, man. Whoo, Nelly. I tell you what.
Well, so here's the thing with those survey results. Give it a little more thought. Here's I think it tells a rational story, because what it says, this was your second question rather than your first question, but the second question says people are willing to take on debt to so-called invest. Very poor idea. But then the first question is phrased as to, if I give you $10,000 right now, what would you do with it? It's that same group of people that already made the poor decision of taking on debt to invest that are then going, oh, I have a bunch of debt that I need to pay off. I think that's the only so-called rational explanation for why those answers are so different, is that after you do that, you regret it and you don't have an easy way to pay back that debt. So you think about a new windfall of cash, basically correcting your previous mistake.
Along those lines, of those who took on debt to invest, 63% said they regret it.
There we go.
But would they do it again?
What?
45% of consumers said they would. Yeah. So 61% would do it again, and 33% would consider it.
Wait. 63% said they regret it, and then 61% said they'd do it again?
Yes. Those two things don't go together typically.
Oh, America.
I told you, man,
this is why the rest of
the
the world is baffled by you.
So American.
Sweet. Shout out to Donald Kent on Twitter, calling us out for our underfollowed Twitter account, which we're going to hire. I keep saying we need to hire an undergraduate intern Doogles. So
Maybe graduate.
Whoa. Hey, have you seen the budget over here?
Go big
all right.
and go home.
Graduate intern. Twitter is at Skippy Doogles. Give us a follow there. SkippyDoogles at Gmail for other listener mail. And we out, right?
Love it. Thank you, everybody.